This is draft season. John Schmeelk, Tony Pauline with you, and we're joined by friend of the program today, Dane Brugler from The Athletic. You can hear him on the Football NFL show, the Athletic NFL show, pardon me, the podcast. Go check it out. We've had Robert Mays on, one of his many co-hosts. Nate Tice does the prospect version of the show with him on Wednesdays. Dane, you get all the coverage in The Athletic, man. It's good to see you. How you been, man?
I'm doing well. We're chugging through the season here. It's good to have new tape. We do all this work over the summer. We get that base of information on these guys, and then the season starts. We're a month and a half in, and we got new tape, and it's really helpful for the process. So chugging along. Got a new top 50 coming out next week. My first update to the summer. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, Tony Pauline, obviously from Sportskeeda. And when I invited Dane to do this, I didn't realize he was doing his offensive line show on the Athletic NFL show last week. So we actually have good timing coming up here. And guys, I'll start with this. And Tony, why don't you lead us off? To me, this is one of the deepest offensive tackles classes we've had in a long time. A lot of players going to go in, and Dane will get you and how many guys you have in your top 50.
Potential premier player at the top, and Fasciano, even though he had a very difficult time against Ohio State, but I mean, he's been a good player for a couple of years. I don't think there's a lot of first-round choices. Potentially, we could see as we move through the process, guys move into the first round. But when you really look at it, I've got 14 tackles right now that are graded as first, second, or third round choices. That number could go up because while everybody falls in love and everybody talks about the quarterbacks before the draft, offensive tackles, especially left tackles, are a premier position that teams really look for come draft weekend. And I think if your team, one of your favorite teams, needs an offensive tackle, you're in good stead this coming April.
And Dave, how many you have in your top 50 right now?
Well, in the preseason in August, I had 8, and it might be even higher in my updated top 50 because this group is so impressive. And we've got 2 elite guys at the top, like Tony mentioned with Fasciano, and then Joe Alt's close. I've been so impressed with Alt from Notre Dame, left tackle, what he has been this year compared to last year. And, we have to factor in this guy is 20 years old. He's 19 years old, 20 years old. He'll be 21 in February. Young player, was a quarterback in high school and then moved to tight end, played a little bit of tackle. He's a blocking tight end, really. And then moves to left tackle at Notre Dame, and he's really blossomed, getting better and better and better, less thinking, more natural for a guy that's a legit 6'7.5", 6'8", in terms of that height. He has pad level. He has body control. He's able to recover. It's really impressive. So Fasciano, Joe Alt at the top, and then there's not a huge drop off. I think J.C. Latham from Alabama is that OT3, at least for me. And then after that, Patrick Paul from Houston is the top senior. I'm still very high on Amarius Mims from Georgia, even though he's been hurt, missed most of this year. The talent off the charts. I mean, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma is really impressive. From Oregon State, Fuaga has been awesome this year. So we could go on and on about these guys. There's so many tackles in this class. Several are juniors, so have to make decisions after this year, but it's a really deep group.
Yeah, and we could start with Fasciano, but I want to go with Joe Alt first, Tony, real quick, because Dane brought him up. And I looked at my notes from when I watched him over the summer, and I wrote down, he very big, very long. I think he uses his length very well. He locks people out with those long arms, and he just doesn't let them go. And I think we saw that when he faced Tuamalu from Ohio State earlier in the year. He really was able to use his length against him well. But to Dane's point, Tony, when I watched him last year, his movement skills didn't look natural. He had the athleticism, but he didn't look natural at the position. But I do think he's looked a lot better this year, and he just frankly hasn't been beat a lot.
Yeah, definitely improved. I mean, I think he does a great job using body positioning, staying square, as well as playing with leverage, bending his knees, those terrific blocking fundamentals. Not the prettiest guy in the world, not as mobile as Fasciano. I would argue probably not as mobile as Guyton as Oklahoma, but a guy who just continually gets the job done. Good hand placement, rides the pass rushers from their angle of attack, always stays square, always on balance. It'll be interesting as we go through the process what his testing numbers are. If teams are truly convinced that he could play left tackle at the next level, I believe he can. I always think you keep a guy at left tackle until he proves otherwise. But again, I mean, the length stands out to you. I don't know about him blocking on the second level, blocking in motion in his own blocking type system, but he protects the quarterback, and that is a premier position come draft day. It's a premier position at the next level, obviously.
And Dane, when you were on the Athletic Football Show last week, I thought you told a really good story. We know Joe Alt's dad, obviously former NFL player, right? And he purposely had him play skill positions for as long as he possibly could before going to that left tackle spot. And I thought it was just really interesting to see how he tried to develop his athleticism. So when he got to tackle, he could become that type of premier player.
That's it. You know, his dad blocked for Joe Montana in Kansas City in the early 90s. And with Joe, who is the youngest of his kids, he could tell pretty quickly with the way his body was growing, this is going to be a future offensive lineman, but he kept him at quarterback, kept him at wide receiver, kept him at tight end, the more space and athletic positions as long as he could, and then eventually made the transition to really develop that athleticism. His movements, the body control, really, really impressive. He's got a very instinctive feel for landmarks. And so he knows he just gets into his position. He can quickly recover, quickly counter. And again, for a guy that's been really playing left tackle for just 3 years, to be able to call him a technician is pretty impressive. And the fact that he keeps getting better and better is really appealing as well. So I think Fashanu is going to be maybe not the consensus OT1, but more teams than not are going to say he's the top tackle this year. But Joe Alt, I think if he's not on the same tier, he's pretty close on that next tier for me.
And Tony, you have Fashanu as your tackle one still, right? Tell us why.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think right now Chicago has the first 2 picks of the draft. They go Celeb Williams and Fashanu because Fashanu, again, did not play well in that Ohio State game, got beat pretty badly at times. But for the most part, you look at him, he's athletic, he's large, he moves incredibly well. He's much more nimble than Alt. He's got better blocking range, more fluid off the edge. You can use him out on the second level. Was considering entering last year's draft, had some hip and shoulder injuries. If he enters last year's draft, he's probably a top 8 pick. Had some hip and shoulder injuries, which was part of the reasons why he went back. It's just he plays much more athletic, and I don't see as much. I think Fashanu, in my opinion, is definitely a right tackle. I think Alt is a guy who's going to have to prove, although he's
left tackle, you mean, Tony?
Left tackle. Although Alt has done very well at left tackle at Notre Dame, I think there will be some discussion as to whether he's going to be a left side player or right side player on Sunday.
And look, I don't like saying things that are, kind of catchy and people want to be outrageous about it. But watching Fashanu, Dane, to me, just his raw physical tools, this guy has more pass protection potential. And look, we've talked about the draft for a lot of years. The Giants have been looking for tackles. I've watched all these tackles. The Giants have needed them. I haven't seen a guy with this much pass protection potential in probably, 7-8 years. I think he's that good of a prospect as a pass protector.
6'6", 321 pounds, 34.5-inch arms. Very, very controlled with his athleticism too. It's not just that he's quicker than everybody else. He's more controlled. And then what I really like about him is his ability to anchor. It's so quick once rushers are able to make contact with him, he can sit down and halt those rushers. There is a little bit of a passive nature to his game. And you see that a lot of times even though he does have decent arm length, rushers will make first meaningful contact at times and able to maybe get him a step backwards, but he does have that anchor and can lock down. Big question with Fashanu is just going to be in the run game. He is not nearly as dominant as a run blocker. It's not as natural to him, but at the same time, it's not like it's a huge deficiency in his game. He's just more good than great as a run blocker. So, but I don't think that's going to keep a team from not drafting him in the top 5. This is I will still be surprised if the first 3 picks are not Caleb Williams, Drake May, Marvin Harrison Jr. in some type of order. I'll be very surprised if it's not. But Olu Fashanu, the player that he is and the position that he plays, the premium that left tackle is, and so many teams need that position. That's the one guy that could maybe disrupt that first 3, those first 3 players going with the first 3 picks.
And I know Tuamalo got him a couple of times in that fourth quarter, but he was quiet for the first 3. So again, I think people are going to make a lot of that, but I don't think that's really going to, ding him long-term here. I know both you guys like Tyler Guyton. Let's go there first, and then we'll go to Latham. I know, Tony, you have Guyton as your number 2 guy, even ahead of Alt here. What is it you really like about Guyton?
Potential, upside. I mean, Guyton was the guy who struggled to break into the starting lineup last year, comes into the season with high grades, 6'7", 320 pounds, very athletic guy, moves well. I watch him. He's a right tackle, but I think he's got the athleticism to move to the other side. He's someone who continually improves on a weekly basis at Oklahoma. It seems the more playing time he gets, the better he is. And he's not just a big guy who just athletically beats down opponents, solid fundamentals, constant improvement. And again, I think it's a Lane Johnson, if you will, type situation, that he's a very athletic guy. And if you want your right tackle to be a super athletic, sort of mobile guy, that's where Guyton fits in. I like his improvement since he's been a full-time starter at Oklahoma this year. I see his upside, and I see the athleticism and the movement skills. And there have been people out there, area scouts in Oklahoma, who feel he's going to be a top 10 pick. I don't agree with that, but I do think he's going to be a first-round selection.
Dane, your thoughts on Guyton?
I agree. I think he's going to be a first-round pick because of a lot of what Tony said. The traits are outstanding. And again, NFL teams don't draft you because of what you've done. They draft you for what they think you're going to do. And when you have this type of potential with a player like this, I can certainly understand why Guyton could go, as early as the top 15, top 20. I could see that. I could understand why that could happen. Go back to when he was at TCU catching touchdown passes. I mean, this is just a very gifted player, and you see the inexperience. You see some of the raw elements of his game. Needs to cut down on some of the penalties. You also want to find out why isn't he at left tackle? And this is something, J.C. Latham, Amarius Mims at Georgia, these guys are staying at right tackle instead of moving to left tackle. As simple as, that's just where they feel most comfortable, and they could realistically play either spot. I mean, that's part of the digging with some of these right tackles. Just, selfishly as an evaluator, I want to see them at both spots, be able to, hey, check that box. They can play left or right. But as of right now, it's more of a projection than, factual evidence on tape that, yes, he can move to the left side.
Hopefully, I like Guyton, we'll get to see him in something like the Senior Bowl, and I'm sure they'll move him over to left side and see what he's got at that position.
Yeah, and I was watching him a little bit the last couple of days, and what drives me nuts, Oklahoma is one of those teams you got to watch like 150 plays to get 10 true pass sets. And I'm like, can you just get me a true pass set here? It's hard to do the evaluations of some of these college offenses. Just a pet peeve of mine. Let's go to Latham. I know, Dane, you're higher on him than Tony is. I liked watching he loves to finish. Like at the end of these plays, he's like these pancaking guys. He's throwing guys down to the floor. He's very physical. What else do you like about Latham, the right tackle out of Alabama?
He can answer power. He can answer quickness. I'm watching the Tennessee tape this morning from the weekend, and he was dominant at times, especially against James Pierce, who's a true sophomore pass rusher, a guy we'll be talking about a lot next year. There were times where Alabama would leave the running back home to help, and Latham gave him nothing to do because he would lock down the pass rusher. He's a good athlete, not a great athlete, but a good athlete, a good enough athlete. Awesome grip strength. Once he latches, it's over. There was another rep in the run game where he gets to the second level and just dumps the linebacker like it was nothing. So I think he moves well for his size. I like the way he uses his hands. The way he can contact and reset. There are times where, especially on inside moves, he has a tough time redirecting and reacting to some of those more savvy rushers.
I saw that on his 2022 tape, especially. A lot of times he got beat inside last year.
Yeah, but I think, he does play balanced. And so I think he's getting better there. I just think that when you look at his tape, there are flashes of dominance, and a lot of his mistakes, I think, are more youthful than something that you are worried about being a long-term thing. So I've seen enough progression from him last year than this year that I feel comfortably calling him my OT3 at this point.
And Tony, you see him more as a second-round guy. Why?
Yeah, I agree with everything Dane says. The size does concern me, and I think it's part of getting beat on the inside moves. I mean, is he 350? Is he 360? Is he over 360? How big is this guy, and what can he get down to? Because it's much easier to play at 350 plus pounds on Saturday than it is on Sunday. And if he's got to lose weight, does he lose any edge in his game? I love the player. I agree with everything Dane says. It's just, these guys that are so huge have such an advantage on Saturday. And then all of a sudden you come into the NFL, you got to get down to 330 or whatever it is. How is that going to affect him? And it's just that I like some of the other guys that we'll talk about better than J.C. Latham. Absolutely love his game. There's no doubt about it. Just want to see what his true size is, what they expect him to play at on Sunday.
And Jordan, one of the guys you like more than him is Jordan Morgan, Tony. He's fourth on your tackle list. What do you like out of him from Arizona?
Yeah, incredibly athletic. I mean, if we're going to talk about the top tackles, he's as athletic, if not more athletic than any of them. 6'5", maybe a shade under 6'5", over 305 pounds. This is your zone blocking tackle. This is the guy who is a terrific pass protector, great movement skills, outstanding fundamentals. You see the knee bend, the way he plays with leverage, the way he stays square. He can get on the second level. Outstanding at pass protection. Sort of like Fasano, probably not a great run blocker, but he doesn't, give up a lot there. I think Morgan he's not a poor run blocker. I think Morgan is one of those guys that, as we go through the process, teams become enamored with his athleticism. They see the movement skills on film. He's one of those guys that could potentially jump into the late part of round one because they will project the type of offensive left tackle that he's going to be 2 or 3 years down the road.
How about you, Dave?
Yeah.
Your thoughts on him?
I'm comfortable calling Morgan a top 40 guy. He is very balanced, movement skills, like Tony mentioned. Really like his feet, his coordination. Worry a little bit about his anchor. That's something we saw quite a bit on the Washington tape against Braylon Trice, who is a power guy, go right at you. And sometimes because he is athletic, especially on the move, but his kick slide range, there are some holes there a little bit. And so I do wonder if he would be a better guard. That's something that, I know we've talked about, teams have talked about as well. So, he is if he didn't have that injury last year, maybe he comes out in last year's class and I think would have been somewhere in the top 50, top 60 picks, comes back and he's played well this year. So I think that, it's between Jordan Morgan and Patrick Paul, the Houston tackle, in terms of who's going to be that first senior tackle drafted.
Yeah, I would agree. I think some teams will absolutely project Morgan as his own blocking guard because the movement skills are so good.
Dane, you mentioned him before, and you got to help me with the first name. Talise Fuaga?
Yeah, it sounds good enough.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
See, now you're my go-to guy with the pronunciations. and by the way, I have a couple more on this list I'm not to ask you about. I watched him this morning. I love his feet. He just kind of has that like pitter patter. But again, Oregon State is one of those offenses too, where it's kind of gonna tough to see how maybe some of that stuff will translate to the NFL. Your thoughts on Fuaga?
Well, it's funny because you talk to scouts and they tell you to watch that Oregon State offensive line because of Joshua Gray, the left tackle. It's the right tackle, Fuaga, who is having the better year and I think is the better NFL prospect. He is. Talk about a people mover in the run game. This guy, his stiff hands, and once he gets his hands on you, he moves you. Did it consistently to Latu, the first round pass rusher from UCLA on that tape. Consistently moved him in the run game. There are times when, because his first reflex in pass pro is to use his hands because he's so powerful with them that he is late with his feet to answer counters. He'll get a little upright earlier in the rep than you want to see. And so against savvy rushers, I think, it does look a little segmented with how he reacts, but his bread and butter is the run game. He's so impressive. He creates displacement with his hands. And it's just been consistently productive for him this year. So he's gone from a guy that talking to scouts over the summer when, they brought up his name, it was like, mid rounds or day 3. And I mean, it's hard not to talk about him as he put himself in the early round draft conversation with how he's played up to this point.
Yeah, I have him as a second round. I mean, he was great as late as the 5th round, even later coming into the season, and he has proved another athletic right tackle. I mean, he's a dominant run blocker, and it's funny because as Dane said, Josh Gray is a terrific left tackle at Oregon State, but Fuaga's game has taken off. He is a dominant run blocker who's got good athleticism, excellent size, 6'6.5", 325 pounds. If he needs to, he can probably put on a few more pounds if a team wants him to. Just a little bit rough around the edges, but a guy whose game is definitely on the rise. And that's the type of player that I think teams look towards when you come to draft weekend.
Yeah, another guy that I think I wish he had ascended a little bit more from what I've seen so far is the big left tackle out of BYU, Kingsley Suamaitai. And I watched him last year. Just a gigantic human being. He has some bouncer moments where he just kind of tosses guys out of the club using his strength. But Tony, watching him, he's still kind of all over the place a little bit to me. He hasn't smoothed out some of those rough edges like I wish he would have heading into this year.
Well, remember, last year he played right tackle. So he moved to the left side because they wanted to use that athleticism. And you're absolutely right. I mean, he's a big athletic guy, still learning to play the position. but he's got great upside, and he's not bad. It's just that he's got to brush off some of his techniques. Really good on his feet, shows the ability to get out to the second level, engage linebackers and block in motion, decent pass protection. He's just going to be basically play more within himself and be more under control, but still learning the left tackle position after playing right tackle for BYU.
Yeah, Dane, this is going to be a big traits pick, right? Because I think teams are going to have to do a lot of projecting with him.
No doubt, a former 5-star guy, related to Penei Sewell and that family. There's a lot of things that you can see how talented he is. That's not much of a question. But one of the things that I think really helps is, when you talk to people at BYU within the program, they glow about him. The person that he is, the worker that he is, the player they think he'll continue to grow into. He's just a young player. And a lot of these guys that we've been talking about, I think Fashanu Alt, they're coming out. But these other guys, Guyton and Fuaga, they're technically juniors and are technically underclassmen who have to declare. And, with Kingsley, he's a third-year sophomore, so still a young player, and it wouldn't be surprised if he went back to school. But if he did come out, he's looking at a guy. We're going to be talking about him as a day 2 pick with a chance to maybe even ascend in the late part of round 1, because again, he is so talented. And we've mentioned it before. Every team, all 32 teams, are looking for offensive line help, and all it takes is one team to believe in what he could grow into. And you can't really take that guy too early in the draft if you believe in him.
All right, I'm going to let you guys just kind of bounce back and forth now on other offensive tackles you like that could maybe sneak into round 2, early round 3. Tony, let's start with you.
I mean, I like Mike Gonzalez of Pittsburgh a lot, as an athletic right side guy. Someone who is going to start to get a lot of talk. And I know I'm going to butcher his last name, so maybe Dane can help me here, is the kid from Yale, Kieran Amagadaji, sort of the Ali Marpet of 2023, if you will. I mean, we talked about a guy like Joe Morgan being very athletic, but not being a great run blocker. Same thing here with the kid from Yale. I mean, he is super athletic. I'm told 36-inch arms, good pass blocker, good on the second level, doesn't have that great run blocking strength. But I say Ali Marpet because if you remember, when Ali Marpet came out of Hobart, small school, played left tackle at the Senior Bowl, played every position at the Senior Bowl, and just dominated everybody. Dominated the power guys, dominated the speed guys. And I could see that happen with Amagadaji from Yale. And I think he's going to be a day 2 choice. I've had some scouts tell me second round. And again, because he's a good athletic guy now with growth potential, who 2 or 3 years down the road, is going to be a starting left tackle or at least a zone blocking guard on Sunday.
I'm a big fan of Amagadaji. I'm with you. It's tough, but it's also tough to get around him because he's a really good left tackle. And I had a good conversation with him last week. And as impressed as I am with him as a player, probably even more impressed with him as a person. Just a really smart. Just every answer was thought out. He's a really nice guy. The thing that really complicates his draft process now is he's out for the year. He just had surgery. Probably going to be out for part of the draft process. And so not having the Senior Bowl, not having, part of those all-star games where he can go up against FBS competition, better competition than he's used to going up to facing in the Ivy League. That's tough because this is a player that's young. I mean, he's 22 years old. He didn't really start playing football until high school. He didn't start until his junior year of high school. So 2 years there, and then he goes to Yale. The first year he's there, season's canceled, COVID. Next year is at right guard. Only the last 2 years he's been at left tackle. So really, really impressive. Official measurements I've got on him: 6'5", 321, 36 3/4 inch arms. So just when you look at the frame that he has, the movement skills, he's got a basketball background. And then you factor in the worker that he is, the person that he is. I mean, I agree. Top 100, absolutely in play. It's just the injury now. What does that mean for our Yale left tackle long term and for the draft process? Patrick Paul from Houston. I think he is a guy that in my preseason top 50, I had him in the 20s, kind of betting on that ascension as a senior. And I think we've seen that, some of that. He looks the part. He's big, he's strong, impressive length, impressive striking skills. We saw him last year go up against Tyree Wilson against Texas Tech, did a nice job. He's just a hard guy to escape because he has the wingspan to take up so much space and get his hands on you. He has the competitive traits that you want. He can just overwhelm you at the point of attack. There's sloppy moments. There's no doubt about it. Just needs time to develop. But he's another guy that I think is somewhere in that top 50 conversation.
All right, before we jump to center and guards here, I want to ask both of you guys a question because I haven't had a chance to ask both of you guys this yet. Evan Neal, he's someone, this is for the Giant fans that are listening. This is not a Giants podcast, but for the Giant fans that are listening. Were there any indications when you watched him in pass pro at Alabama? When I remember watching him his tape at Alabama, I thought he could sometimes get over his skis a little bit in the run game. He could lean a little bit. He had some balance issues there. But I didn't foresee any of these pass pro issues that he's had here with the Giants when I watched his tape at Alabama. Dane, let's start with you. Are you surprised that he's had some of the pass pro issues he's had here in the NFL, given what you saw from him on tape in college?
I thought we would see more progression at this point because there were times where he would fall off blocks. He would get his upper half overextended at times, both in the run game and in pass pro when he's reaching for a guy. And so I think that there are times when on film where he was beaten to the corner because his lateral range was good but not great. And you're still seeing some of those issues now. And he was on the ground more than you wanted to see in college. So it was more fundamental things, not falling off blocks, staying on his feet. I thought at this point of his career, we would see just a little bit more progression to this point. But you know what? Tackle's a hard position, and Giants, nobody knows more than Giants fans. And you talk about Andrew Thomas and the way he played as a rookie and then how he got better and better and better. You're hoping for that same thing from Evan Neal. We just haven't seen it up to this point.
How about you, Tom?
Go back to what I said about JC Latham. It's much easier to play on Saturday when you're 345 pounds plus than it is on Sunday. So, people fall in love with these supersized guys. It's not always a guaranteed recipe for success. And I think and then Evan Neal had issues anyway at Alabama anyway, with little nicks and bruises here and there. Did I think it would be where we're at now? No, but there was always that concern with those mammoth-sized offensive linemen, the longer offensive linemen, when they make the transition to the NFL.
And I'm going to follow up with you guys on this because this is a question I've kind of asked myself. Evan Neal, despite the fact he was on Bruce Feldman's Freaks List, right, and he had that crazy video where he's doing the box jump and he's doing like the splits to hold himself up. You mentioned his, on his kick, he doesn't get outside sometimes as much as he needs to, Dana. We've seen him get challenged on the edge a little bit. When guys are healthy and they don't do the athletic testing, how much of a red flag should that be for evaluators when you're thinking, well, is there a reason why he doesn't want to put those numbers down for evaluators?
Yeah, it just adds another, thing you have to investigate and you figure out, is he not doing these drills because maybe he's not 100%. Maybe he doesn't want to put up bad numbers, or maybe no matter what, he's going to put up bad numbers. He's just not a great tester. Teams will trust the tape and whether or not you can tell whether or not he's a good enough athlete. But it does create a little bit of doubt. And as a prospect, you want to eliminate all doubt. That's kind of the point. But if maybe you weren't going to test well, because you knew he was doing these drills, all the combine drills, and getting timed during the process. And if he wasn't putting up the times that, you would expect from a top 10 pick, then he made the decision. It was also interesting that I know his weight went up between the combine and the pro day, almost like 10 pounds. That's also something that, teams pay attention to and say, he got down to 335 for the combine and then, he's 345 for the pro day. Like that's, or maybe he doesn't weigh in at the pro day and something like that. And so that's something else that teams will look at, especially for a player like Evan Neal, who I know was like close to 390 at some point in high school. So to Tony's point, the weight fluctuation is something that was definitely a talking point with scouts before the draft.
It's funny, John, you talk about that because you remember when we had Bruce Feldman on, we talked about Mozzie Smith, and Mozzie Smith was the number one on Bruce's Freaks List in 2022, did no testing prior to the draft. And you got to wonder, and I posed this question to Bruce is, when Bruce writes about these guys in glowing terms about how these 300+ pound guys are going to run super fast. I think with Mozzie Smith, it was like a 6'7" and a 3 cone. Are they concerned that, if I don't live up to expectations, even if I run a good time at 7.2, it's not going to be the 6.7 that was reported that I ran by Bruce Feldman. So I wonder if that comes into play with it at times.
Interesting. All right. I know it's not a great center guard class, unlike the tackle class here. So Dane, let's start with you. You can either go guard or center. I'll let you choose. Who really jumps out at you that maybe could get into late first round conversation, or are we talking mostly second and third round guys here?
I think we're mostly talking about day 2 prospects here. And the center class in particular is not a very strong group. But I tell you what, Zach Frazier from West Virginia, he was my top center coming into the season, and he's, I think, only solidified that. You love his background, four-time state champion wrestler coming out of West Virginia. And it's fascinating with his family background. His mom's side of the family, those are the wrestlers. He's got like 3 uncles that were state champion wrestlers. His grandfather was a state champion wrestler. Then his dad's side, his dad played college football, and so the blending these 2 families created this Zach Frazier center, who is a terrific player. He's got guard experience. He plays longer than he's not going to measure very long, but he plays longer than that. And you see the physicality, you see the quickness. He can get to the second level, blocks through the whistle. There's a lot of things that when teams are kind of checking the box for center, Zach Frazier hits those. So I don't expect him to be a first round pick necessarily, but somewhere on day 2, I think Zach Frazier is going to come off the board. And especially, like I said, it's just not a strong center class. And I think that could, help maybe prop him up even a little bit more for teams that really are evaluating that position come draft time.
Tony, you were nodding your head there about the centers. You agree on the class?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any centers coming off the board to the 3rd round. And my top center is Charles Turner of LSU, who I think has played much better this year. Not the biggest guy in the world, but he plays big football. It's not a bad guard class. I mean, the guards are basically 2nd and 3rd round guards, and they're all seniors. Really, I don't see too many underclassmen at this point in time. I don't think Cooper Beebe of Kansas State, who was the one guy who maybe had that potential to squeak in the first round, I don't think he's really elevated his game to the point where I'm going to say, he's a top 32 pick, but he is a big, nasty, punch in the mouth type of power blocker. Brandon Coleman, the tackle from TCU, a little bit more athletic. I project him as guard. Some teams will keep him out of tackle, but I think he'd be real good in his zone blocking system. Javion Cohn from Miami of Florida. A little bit disappointed in Donovan Jackson of Ohio State this year. There was a lot of talk coming into the season, I should say, that if he elevated his game, he's a guy who could go first round. I think up until last week against Penn State, that entire Ohio State offensive line had not met expectations and had played much worse than people thought. I think Donovan Jackson's a good player. I don't believe he's elevated his draft stock this year with his play.
Dane, your thoughts on the guards?
Yeah, and I would agree with most of that. I mean, my top guard is Troy Fontenot, the Washington left tackle, who I think is going to be kicked inside, and he's had a really good year. We talk about that Washington offense and obviously talk about Michael Penix and the receivers, and deservedly so, but you can't talk about that Washington offense without talking about the tackles with Rosengarten at right tackle and Fontenot at left tackle. But like I said, I think he'll move inside to guard, and he might be I think he has a chance to put him, because as well as he's played this year, could be the first guard off the board. Graham Barton from Duke, another left tackle who is going to be better inside. He's going to fall short of that 33-inch arm length measurement. So I think a lot of, this will be the Peter Skoronski conversation, and, the left tackles in college who are going to be moved inside, just better off there. They could probably survive at left tackle, but to maximize his NFL career, I think Graham Barton will be inside at guard or even at center. He played center as a freshman, and so I think he can do that. And then the only other guard I would mention, Zach Zinter from Michigan, who has been a little underwhelming. Really, that entire Michigan offensive line has been a little underwhelming, considering they've won the Joe Moore Award the last 2 years. They're one of the deeper units in all of college football. Execution has just been a little bit up and down, Zinter included. So, but I think all of these guys we're talking about are more day 2 players, guys that we expect to go somewhere between the 2nd and 4th rounds.
Dane, awesome stuff. You can see all of Dane's stuff on The Athletic. Also, again, The Athletic Football Show. He's on every Wednesday with Nate Tice, breaking down everything draft. Dane, tell the folks anything else you want to tell them before we say goodbye.
Oh, you can find all my stuff at DP Brugler on Twitter. A lot of all 22 clips. Find all my articles and stuff that I post there. And so, Yeah, it's like I said, updated top 50 coming out next week. Currently working on that. So excited to share that with everyone.
Dane, good stuff, man. We'll catch up with you later in the draft prospect, brother. Good talking to you as always.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks.
Thanks, Dane.
That's Dane Brugler. Does a great job covering the draft for The Athletic. He's been a mainstay on our programming here, covering the draft for the last 10 years or so. He does an awesome job. We thank Dane for joining us. And Tony, let's just do a brief wrap up here of the offensive line in terms of a class overall, from tackles to guards to centers. Give me your summation of everything we've kind of talked about today.
Very strong tackle class, which is what NFL teams want to see. A very weak center class, which is usually, I think last year was the exception to the norm when you had so many offensive centers go in the first 100 picks. And I think the guard pick class has got potential. Good variety. You got a lot of power blockers. You got some zone blockers. You got tackles, college tackles, as we talked about, who are going to move into guard. You got some guards that will be tried at center. So I'd say the tackle class is very strong, and it's really deep through 4 rounds. I like the guard class starting in day 2 through the 4th round. The center class, it's a situation where, if you want one, you want to ensure you want to get one, you better take it early because the pickings are slim and it's not very deep.
All right, now let's talk about the games from this weekend, Tony. And I think a good place to start here is that Ohio State-Penn State game. Yeah. Your thoughts on what you saw? We saw Tiamalu make a couple of the edge rusher for Ohio State. We're going to do edge rushers and defensive linemen next week. Everybody should stay tuned for that. Got the best of Olu Fashanu in that game for Penn State towards the end. Otherwise, I thought Fashanu was fine over the course of the game, but 2 big sacks to end 2 drives late there. I think one was a pressure, one was a sack, right? And just, Ohio State managed to hold on against a very talented Penn State team. But it reminded me of one of those old school Big Ten games from like the early 90s where neither team had a quarterback. And it was just run, punt, run, pass, punt. And it wasn't the prettiest football you'll see.
Yeah, from a game perspective, I think Ohio State played their best game of the season, and Penn State played their worst game of the season, especially Lar, the Penn State quarterback, who had been playing so well. Fashanu didn't play poorly up until the end, but when I watched him, he wasn't playing like a top 5 pick. I mean, he didn't really excite you. He had some good reps, but there were some reps where you're like, okay. And then, whether it was a sack and a pressure, whether it was 2 sacks, they were game-disrupting plays where Fashanu basically just got pushed back into the pocket by a smaller defensive end. Let's hope, and I'm expecting that this to just be a blip on the screen for Fashanu because he's been such a terrific player. But let's watch, how it plays out. I think the other thing you take out of that Ohio State game is what a phenomenal player Marvin Harrison is, because, they knew the ball was going to him. They couldn't stop him. He's not only physically gifted, but he's a smart football player. How many times is he finding the open seam and underneath coverage? There was one play where the defender, I think it was Kalen King, who basically had his hands full all day, got called for pass interference, yet Marvin Harrison made the reception down on the 2-yard line. And I mean, really, receivers going in the top 5, you're like, there's a lot of risk there. You get receivers later on, although I don't like that sort of mind thought. But I mean, Marvin Harrison has absolutely established himself as one of the top 2 players in this draft. Whether he's one of the top 2 players selected in the draft is completely different. I thought the Ohio State defensive line, the pass rushers, played really well. I like Cade Stover, the tight end, a lot. We've talked about him in the past.
How about that contested catch he had on that seam route, reaching over the linebacker? Great catch.
And remember, I mean, he hurt his knee. He had to come back in. So I think overall, I thought it was a tough day for the Penn State cornerbacks. I thought Kalen King really had his lunch handed to him by Marvin Harrison.
Tough matchup.
and I think I actually think if Ohio State had a quarterback that was a little bit more accurate, that game wouldn't be closer. That game would have been a blowout for Ohio State. So, I mean, it was an interesting game. We learned a lot from top prospects, not only Fashanu and Marvin Harrison, but guys who are going to go: Kalen King, Cade Stover, the Ohio State tight end, Theo Johnson, who has really never lived up to expectations, made some nice catches, but then he's dropping balls. And I think it's pretty, you can basically brand him as more athlete than football player at this point in time.
All right, let's jump over to Alabama, Tennessee. Your takeaways from that game.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the cream rises to the top. I think Alabama, even though they're not as talented as they've been in the past, they are still the more talented team. I think their receivers are somebody to keep an eye on. I think McClellan, in my opinion, is just rising through the draft boards, rising up draft boards. I don't think he's going to be an early pick, but I think he's going to be Jason McClellan, the running back from Alabama. He's got a potential to be a day 2 pick and be a real good rotational sort of situational runner at the next level. I thought he had a real good game in big spots.
Absolutely.
I think one other thing is, I think in that game, once again, we've seen the best and the worst of Joe Milton. I mean, Joe Milton, the quarterback from Tennessee, at the top of his game, you're like, wow, this guy is a great NFL prospect. And then he'll throw in some clunkers. He'll make some bad passes. He'll make some bad decisions. And that's why it's going to be very tough. It's going to be a roll of the dice with Joe Milton, where teams select him at the next level. You take a chance on him in day 2 because he's got these incredible physical skills and he shows these flashes, or you're going to wait to day 3 and say, listen, we're just going to hope, but we're not going to expect a whole lot out of Joe Milton.
Absolutely. And then the night game, what do you think of Caleb Williams? Did he bounce back sufficiently for you in that game at night against Utah?
Listen, I think you and Dane talked about it well enough in the beginning, in the sense that this is not a talented USC team. It's Caleb Williams and everybody else. I mean, when you look at the USC draft board, I mean, are there going to be any other day 2 picks? Are there going to be other top 100 picks rather than Caleb Williams? He doesn't have Jordan Addison to throw the ball to him. He doesn't have a consistent receiver. I'm not going, the guy's trying to make plays. Maybe he's taking too much on his own shoulders. I mean, there's going to be bad games, but he's not on a good team. And if you take Caleb Williams off that USC team, USC doesn't go 500, in my opinion. That's how much he means to that squad. I thought that they were overrated to begin with coming into the season, because I saw the makeup of the team and I saw that it was Caleb Williams and everybody else. So basically, to go undefeated this far into the season, I was surprised, and I still think they're going to lose more games. And I think you'll see up and down from Caleb Williams, but he's just trying to do too much because he doesn't have great talent around him.
Yeah,
he doesn't have really good talent around him. I'm talking about great talent. You don't need great talent. He's got average players around him.
Yeah, and I think you have to take that into consideration when you do the evaluation.
Absolutely,
you have to look at the talent and the tools and understand the context of the situation that he's in, which obviously most people aren't willing to do. They just look at box scores and stats and they say, he's not playing well. What's going on? So something else to keep an eye on. Anything else from the weekend, Tony, that you want to throw out there or bring up before we say goodbye?
Keep an eye on a cornerback from Toledo by the name of Quinnen Mitchell. Toledo won a very difficult game over Miami of Ohio. I know nobody pays attention to the MAC. It was 21-17. But Quinnen Mitchell is a long cornerback. He goes about 6'1". He's been a terrific player for a couple of years, had 3 pass breakups in that game, one later in the game when Miami was driving to try and go ahead. Miami lost, Toledo won the game 21-17. Quinnen Mitchell's a guy that I believe we're going to see at the Senior Bowl. And he's someone that no one talks about at the cornerback position. But as we go through the draft process, more and more people will start talking about him.
And we went longer on the O-line than we thought. We were going to do non-Power 5 guys this week too, but we'll do that later on when we have some more time. And I don't want to rush that conversation. Tony's always digging deep with some of these guys, like players from Toledo. So make sure you stay tuned to draft season as we move forward here. We're done with the offense. We'll move on to defense next week as we continue on draft season. Thanks to Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda. Thanks to Dane Brugler from The Athletic. We'll see everybody next week.